As we begin, just remember that when we're talking about liberalism, we're talking about the early 19th century version of liberalism. This is not the modern definition of liberalism. A good example of this, to help make that clear, is that a good 19th century definition of a liberal party would be the GOP. Now, we wouldn't use that term now. We wouldn't describe the modern GOP as liberal, precisely because our definitions of conservatism and liberalism have changed. But in the context of the early 19th century, the GOP is well in line with a liberal party. Its party platform was for free land and free labor, which is well in line with the liberal inclinations and ideals of this time period. So what is it that liberals are about in the early 19th century? Well, they are fans of freedom. They want freedom of the press. They want religious toleration. They're proponents of abolitionism. They want freedom in all its forms, free trade, all the rest of these things. And so you can see that they want religious toleration. They're in favor of abolitionism. But they also want, say, written constitutions. Why is that? Well, they're also fans of freedom and believe that by writing your freedoms down in a constitution, that is something that can't be inhibited by the government. The government can't step in and take your rights. Additionally, they believe in private property. Reason is they think that is the basis of a certain measure of freedom. But it also fits with something that socially matters. Namely, liberals of this period are largely made up of the middle class. And so they share their inclinations and they share their interests. So why do the liberal parties largely stand in favor of private property? Well, most of their members, the middle class, believe in private property. The middle class believe in free markets and free trade. They believe in laissez-faire capitalism. They believe in capitalism whereby the state isn't really that involved, that the government lets it alone. Because think back to our previous module about the developments of the middle class. It's a time in which a lot of them are making a lot of money and they're living better lives. So why would they want the government getting involved and regulating economics and regulating industry? Things are going well. So you can see that this is both the ideals of the liberal parties and some of their principles are driven by their middle class identity. Now, there were some differences in terms of liberalism, just as they were in conservatism. A good example of a liberal being, if you will, out of step, or at least maybe a bit further on than some liberals of his time period, was John Stuart Mill. In his book on liberty, published in 1859, he promoted an expansive view of liberty. Namely, what put him out of step was he wasn't simply in favor of freedom, voting, all the rest of the things that liberals at this time period were. He takes that freedom, that commitment to freedom, even farther. While some liberals had advocated for giving the right to vote to all men, Mill went even further. He said that women should have the right to vote as well. He saw that as simply an extension of the principles of freedom and of liberalism, and thus this liberty should be extended to women as well. By many of his fellow liberals, he's seen as a bit extreme, but it does suggest that these principles of liberalism are going to lead to some of the changes that we're going to see later on in Western civilization. Now, Mill does represent that within liberalism at this time there were certain limits. Again, questioning of the role of women. And it's helpful to realize that many of the limits, if you will, on liberalism were in many ways driven by the fact that most of their members were middle class. Because of that, they believe in that separate sphere identity, that there is a sphere for women and there is a sphere for men. This is why most of them resist calls by those like John Stuart Mill to expand the franchise to women. This is also why when they talk about the right to vote and how they want that, many of them believe that property requirements or a property qualification is necessary for those who want to vote. In this way, what they're championing is people like us should vote. People who think like us should vote. Maybe not those workers, maybe not those people that we oversee in the factories, but people like us. And so in all of this, you should see that liberalism is somewhat limited by the fact that most of its members are middle class and share their biases, share their perspective, share in many ways that distinctiveness that the middle class were forming during the Industrial Revolution.